Good afternoon, everyone. We will call the Coronavirus Ad Hoc
Recording
Committee
in progress.
to order at this time for September the 19th, 2023. Ms. Krill, if you will, please call the roll.
Brenham,
Here.
Barron,
Here.
Newton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Our next order of business is the minutes for June the 27th. You can find those items on pages 5 through 11. Are there any modifications that need to take place to our minutes? If not,
Move to approve.
Second.
Grillo?
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Mr. Brown or Ms. Carrillo, do we have any changes that we need to make to our agenda?
We have received no requested changes.
I'm going to entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Our next order of business is the discussion item, which is for the small business category and some considerations. Just to review somewhat a little bit, in the past, over the last several months, this committee, along with council, we put out $16 million that would go to local nonprofits as well as small business owners. We have awarded all categories with the exception of the small business as well as the youth and recreation and then affordable housing. With affordable housing, those funds have been dispersed in another portion of our budget so that we will come back at a later date to discuss how we want to disseminate those funds and the plan for those funds. As it relates to youth and recreation services, we also will have to come back and revisit how we'd like to move forward with that category. And so, given these are the last three categories that we need to award, we have before us a conversation that we need to, number one, I want staff to give us an update on what we received, and then the information and recommendations that we received from Guidehouse. Guidehouse was our third-party vendor who helped us through this process. And then from there, I would like for us to have a discussion as some potential opportunities to disperse these dollars, noting that when we go into specifics of talking about some of the applicants, which are local businesses, we will more than likely go into executive session to keep the confidentiality of those companies and until the moment that we're ready to discuss them specifically as an applicant. So, Mr. Brown, if you would please, you are someone from your staff to give us an update for this body as well as for those that are viewing where we are with this particular category.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And what we've done over the last few opportunities that we've had these discussions related to the American Rescue Plan Act funds, we've had our Assistant County Administrator that oversees that general area of our finance program speak to the committee and council. So we're going to continue that on this afternoon. If you will recognize ACA Lori Thomas, we'll have her provide that general overview and then begin to provide some of that information before you go into your discussions.
Thomas, you're recognized. And while you're coming to the podium, I'd be remiss not to say this for I don't know how many times, but thank you for your leadership during this process, and thank you for making sure that we stay on the straight and narrow path to have as little as exposure to the county as possible and keeping the integrity of this process.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and it's been my pleasure, and I look forward to continuing to work with this project. As you're aware, when Guidehouse began this process, we had approximately 140, 141 applicants in the small business category that requested over $10 million. And the numbers escape me momentarily. However, in Guidehouse's process, there were two components. First was a risk stratification. The risk stratification was based on Guidehouse's requirements to ensure that the county would not be putting itself at significant risk by affording specific projects for groups. That scale was on a scale of 1 to 25. Council with 25 being the best that you could get. The lower the score, the more risky it was for the county. In that risk stratification, we only had 14 applicants in the small business category that actually were significantly over or were 15 or greater in that category. When the scores were actually then compiled, based on our scoring rubric, the scores in this area were somewhat low. So since that time, we have been trying to determine another methodology that we might be able to stratify these results. And based upon that, one recommendation that Guidehouse did provide to us was that reimbursement for a portion of lost revenue could be a consideration with these groups. While we did then look at the applicants that we had on file, most did not disclose their lost revenue or enough information to disseminate the lost revenue. So we started looking for other resources to be able to come to those determinations. And that brings us to today.
So with that, I think this committee has been provided with a list of those potential applicants or those potential grantees that could receive consideration. And so I think at this point, Mr. Wright, if you will just give us guidance on how to move and do this, I think at this time it might be the most appropriate time for us to go into executive session.
Yes, let's discuss the private information. Executive session would be appropriate. And just need one of the council members to make the motion to enter executive session.
So moved.
Second, any discussion?
I would say that it's based on Code Section 30-7-40, subsection A2.
Thank you. Hearing no discussion, Ms. Carrillo, if you will call for the vote.
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes,
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
we're gonna go in executive session, just right back here.
Chair,
Recognize Ms. Newton.
I move to come out of executive session.
Second, Ms. Carrillo.
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Like to remind everyone that we went into executive session to discuss private information for some of the applicants for the small business category. At this time, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chair,
You recognize Mr. Brennan.
thank you. I do have a motion, and probably just save a lot of the explanation or justification for the details of the motion for discussion period, assuming we get a second on the motion. But the motion is that we advance Kaufman and Company LLC and Thrift Store of Greenville Incorporated, DBA Sunshine Thrift Store, to full council with a recommendation that they be able to advance in the review process so that they can go to that desk review stage of the review and application process. And that regardless of the outcome of the desk review process, which would drill down deeper on a demonstration of harm as required by the ARPA regulations, that the maximum award to each entity would not exceed $25,000.
I'll second. Discussion. Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Brandon, would you just repeat that motion again, please? Okay, can somebody?
Gist of it is Kaufman and Company and Thrift Store of Greenville, DBA Sunshine Thrift Store would advance to the desk review stage for further confirmation that they meet the ARPA requirements, and then the maximum award to each of those businesses would be $25,000.
Thank you.
So we're in discussion period at this point. I will start the discussion by saying this was one of those categories whereas we heard ACA Thomas say over 140 applicants requesting $40 million. And so when we look at the risk factors, the best way to describe it, the higher the risk, the greater the exposure it is for Richland County. What does that look like? The exposure, that means that if this applicant defaults, then Richland County would be responsible for paying those funds back through our general fund, which would mean that we would have to raise taxes. And so this category, as well as all the other ones, we have really looked at risk factors and exposure to the county, and keeping in mind the ARPA guidelines that were set forth. And for those of you who may have your packets, you'll see the applicants there, and you'll see those individuals where we were able to, drill down to maybe, it looks like maybe a top 10 at a glance, a top 10, but even of that top 10, we're still receiving low to moderate risk. So I was very adamant about awarding something in this category because there are many applicants that have shown some exposure during COVID. As being a business owner myself, I think that this is one of those categories, if I was not on council, I would have applied. I would have, and so I want to make sure that this body, along with our colleagues, still put forth the effort to get the funds back into the hands of the community. And so that's why I'm in support of this motion to move these two forward. Any further discussion? Mr. Branham.
A couple of things I just want to mention for certain is that Sunshine Thrift Store is a Richland County operating location. The city of Greenville is named there, or the county, whichever it may be. So I just want to be clear that it is a Richland County location referencing there in that line item. And, Yeah, the amounts requested by those two entities, those are public, are they not?
Not certain, ACA Thomas, were they included in the packet?
No, ma'am, I don't believe that they were.
So for the record, I will state that the applicants that will be moving forward, Kaufman and Company, they requested $60,000, and then the Thrift Store of Greenville requested $49,920.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
the cap that I suggested is a reflection of the amounts that they requested, as well as the amount of risk on that risk score related to those entities, which is within the accepted range of the criteria established by this committee. But again, just as the chair referenced earlier, to say it slightly different way, these are federal funds that we're looking to potentially grant through this county government process. And if we are not in full compliance with the federal program and process, we potentially would have to reimburse for any funds that fell out of compliance. So again, risk is very important to us as we participate in the process. Thank you.
Ms. Newton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for everything that you've shared. And, you know, I too am a small business owner, and I remember waking up saying, oh my word, what is going to happen? And I apologize for saying this again, but I do think it's important that we entered this process, you know, with the desire to distribute funds to the community that was affected. And so for any business that applied and you don't hear your name called, again, we have very strict guidelines that we have to adhere to, and that's what we're trying to do. So we've had a discussion about this, and I think for the benefit of the public, because we have mentioned several times what these regulations are, if Mr. Brown, there's a member of staff who could just speak to, again, how the desk review process is going to work in terms of looking at how we make sure that we both award every penny of funds that are eligible and also provide, you know, the maximum protection for the county so that, you know, we're not on the hook from the general fund.
So coming to the podium, we have our Director of Grants, Ms. Sarah Harris. She will be able to address that question for you.
Thank you, sir.
You recognize Director Harris.
Right, thank you. So as part of this process, it has been quite extensive. We have worked with our third-party vendor Guidehouse to help establish some of those guidelines, which is very strictly based upon U.S. Treasury standards. So this process is mirrored across many communities as well. And I know it's been very tough. It's been a long journey for everyone. And so I have very bad asthma. But I will say, as part of the process, I'm happy to guide any business owners if they'd like to reach out, call, understand that it has been a very complicated process, but we did not reach a lot of the scores that were necessary in this particular process. And so it's been refined and whittled down to this point, which is extensive, but it is common to other counties as well.
And then to the desk review process, what happens next?
So what will happen is the selected candidates will move to the desk review process. They will evaluate the criteria of different additional support and documentation for financial purposes to review lost revenue. And those things are very important when it comes to ARPA, because what we're looking for is, did that business in fact lose significant amounts of funding during that time? So in that desk review process, they'll evaluate that information. They'll move on to see if they are qualified to manage a grant as well, conditional to the U.S. Treasury guidelines. So that particular guideline and process with the final rule is complex. It's hundreds of pages. And so Guidehouse has been assisting the county with that process. And so for any small business owner, I welcome the conversation if they'd like to reach out and call. And I certainly understand that we have some favorable and unfavorable actions that occur with grant processes, and we're very empathetic. So I'm happy to share those conversations with folks as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Item 5 on our agenda is next steps. And so with that, next steps, this item will go to full council as a recommendation out of this committee. And then at that time, full council will take a vote on our recommendation. And based upon our recommendation, then the DESH review will or will not, depending on that vote, will take place with Guidehouse and with the assistance of our grants department. Mr. Brown, are there anything else we need to address in next steps?
No, Madam Chair.
So moving to the next item, staff updates. I would like for staff to go on the record just to give us an update on where we are. As I mentioned earlier, we've awarded all categories with the exception now of the youth and recreation, as well as with affordable housing, which we will come back during our next meeting and start to talk about how we want to move forward with those items. But I would like for the general public just to hear about the number of applications that are presently either under DESH review or where we are in the process of making these final awards. Mr. Brown.
Yes, ma'am. We're going to actually have Ms. Sarah Harris, Director of Grants, come back to the podium to address those questions.
Thank you. Recognize Ms. Harris.
Okay, yes, ma'am. I'm just going to sort some data here so I can give a bit of an update. Okay, so we have had a first and second round of desk reviews that has occurred, and I'm going to give you a total right now. Let's see. We have currently 26 desk reviews that are in progress right now with Guidehouse. And so I can provide a total for the ask that has been awarded, but the desk reviews are a little intense, so it's a bit of going back and forth with trying to acclimate clients with the grant process, gathering information, and so it's really a fact-finding mission of sorts. So we are very close to completion, and so I am hoping that in at least, and I'm going to say this, I have not been able to provide really a timeline of surety for a lot of these activities, but my hope is that all of the desk reviews will be completed at least within the next 5 to 6 weeks, internally with my department, working together with Guidehouse. And so we are very close to completion with those materials. And this is for desk reviews.
So with desk reviews, and once you complete, the applicants complete desk reviews, what's the next step?
Okay, so once they complete the desk reviews, then we will execute contract agreements with all of the applicants, and that information is sent pretty quickly to all of the subrecipients. We actually walk through a little bit of an informational guide for each one of these applicants. So even though I provide oversight for a variety of different grants, ARPA has its own set of conditions on reimbursement processes and all of those different things. So we walk them through like the period of performance so they know how far they can backdate invoicing. We walk them through the financial process. So a lot of different elements go into it. And so we have a small but mighty team that's handling it, but that is the process at that point.
Great. Any questions for Director Harris at this time? Thank you, Director Harris. And so I would just like to offer it. It appears, and I've had a conversation with a couple of potential subrecipients who said this whole process is taking a long time, and it is taking a long time. But I think that we need to get it right on the front end. There are, the common thread of this meeting has been that we are operating under federal guidelines. This is not rules that Richland County created, but these are guidelines that the federal government has provided for us and given to us, and that we have to make sure that we adhere to those things. So whereas it does appear it's taking a long time, I do believe once the funds get in the hands of the nonprofits, it's going to be definitely worth it. And I feel very confident, and Mr. Brown, you may even want to weigh in, that even with the timeline that Director Harris has provided to us, that the applicants will still be able to meet the deadline as far as having those funds expended by the federal deadlines.
Yeah. Madam Chair, specifically related to these items where these businesses will be basically showing that they lost revenue, providing the documentation that communicates that lost revenue should be, I don't want to use, to misspeak on their work, but relatively easy. So in a situation where they're accounting for that lost revenue and showing those documents or financial documents, it's a little bit different than where you have maybe a nonprofit that has a program where they were expending funds over time. So yes, ma'am, I believe that in this particular category, a timeline really should not be an issue. It's just a matter of them producing the necessary financial documents and records of their business, showing that lost revenue as a result of COVID-19 impacting their business. Otherwise, it should not be a long process once they receive the funds and having to worry about whether or not they have enough time to expend those funds, because again, it's specific to their lost revenue. So that should be a relatively easy process for those organizations that are ultimately awarded.
So I thanked Ms. Thomas, Mr. Brown, administration. Thank you for helping us through this process, because I think that our ultimate goal was to do good. And although we didn't really know what that looked like, but we're here now, and we almost can call this complete. And to this committee, thank you for, sticking in and doing the work to get it done. So with that, we have one more item on the agenda, item 7 for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Carrillo?
Yes.
Barron,
Yes,
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.